Hello, my name is Emma Wilson. I use she, her pronouns. Um, First, I am going to be talking about chapters 4 and 5 from this book, our Globalization and Feminist Activism book. These chapters were talking about globalization and feminism, talking about feminism in the future and organizations like Unifem and Instra. I think that's how you say them, hopefully. I'm sorry. And how I thought was interesting that in 1995 already there was 3,000 women's organizations participating in the UN's Fourth World Conference on Women, but then also that all those organizations, like feminism at this big group in a whole, is activism for women, but all these organizations kind of like split it up. Sometimes these chapters were a little confusing to get through, but they like split up the concepts of feminism, if I'm understanding it correctly. These chapters also talked about feminism of globalization and neoliberal norms, and how that it's mainly produced in media, and then we see it in media and we reproduce it in our lives. All the our culture norms or societal norms. And in chapter 5, it specifically talked about the death of feminism, which is something that I've never heard before, and I don't know if I am understanding it in the point that I'm supposed to be, or like if I have made it into my own understanding of it. But I had to, in this chapter a couple times, I'd have to like stop and reread what I read because I felt like I wasn't like absorbing it. But what I took from the death of feminism isn't that like feminism isn't going to be existing anymore. It's not like the actual death, like it's going to be gone. But that like if like feminism isn't going to fail, but that if it's not succeeding as fast or in areas that we want, or like we're looking at we're going for the big picture things and not necessarily all the small steps, or vice versa, like that if those things don't necessarily prevail right away, that the pushback that it's providing and the resistance that it's providing in areas like, I think it gives an example of like a cocktail party, or like the resistance that we're giving in everyday life against the patriarchy and against things to provide to increase women's rights is going to be beneficial. It's going to have an impact. It's going to be remembered, and people are always going to remember that, and then always going to be resisting, and that's going to be a strength of it. Hopefully my understanding is around the area of what other people are getting. Sorry, I lost my spot. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that the concept of gender equality, the book said hasn't come from necessarily in like the women's stance in academic conditions increasing, but that men's economic conditions were decreasing, they were worsening. And that brings a connection to my head when I first read that note, was that from the book Angry White Men, how it talks about rights being like pie, and how people who are in power or people who have privilege, specifically angry white men in the book, it's comparing rights to pie, and those people who are in privilege and in power thinking that if more people get equity and equality or more rights, that they're going to have to share their pie, they're going to have to give a slice away, or someone is taking a slice of their pie, but that we should really think of it like everybody is just going to get their own pie, or everybody's having the same amount of pie. You're not going to lose any of your pie. We're just giving more pie to somebody else. Instead of 3/4 of a pie, they're going to have a full pie just like you. And my question for that book and those chapters is have you ever heard of the death of feminism? If you haven't, what was your takeaway from it? Did you turn it into something more empowering, or was the terminology like more of a cause for concern that it was the death of feminism? And then now we'll be talking about chapter 14 in this book, The Immigrant Women Workers. This book talks about the transnational idea of motherhood and gender roles. It shares the story of immigrant women that have decided to leave their families to provide for their families and children, not in a different country, or in a different country, not in a different country, sorry. To provide them with a better life than they had, or provide them with more resources. But a lot of times these women are judged and looked down upon because they're not a good mother, because the idea of motherhood and caregiver is so feminized, in that you have to physically be there for your children and emotionally be there for your children, and though they are providing fiscally for them, they moved away to give them more resources. That's still sometimes looked down upon because they're not doing their job, even though they are providing for their child and providing more than they could before. But because they're the mom, they're supposed to be nurturing and be there emotionally for their child. And it also talks about the hardship that brings, leaving your family. I can't imagine how hard that is for a mom or a kid. All my siblings and I don't live at home anymore. And anytime I go home, my mom waves from the window and waves then from the living room and watches out the front door anytime any of us leave, because she just misses her kids so much, because she's an empty nester now. My sister's a freshman in college. So these moms deciding to go to another country to provide for their children is just so strong, and shows how much love and courage that they have, and that somebody can look down upon another person for that. I can't even fathom how the children and the mom are feeling doing that, but looking down upon somebody else for doing that when they're trying to provide for their family is a little bit crazy to me, because imagine having to do that. And it's also, I remember a point in the book where the son said that he didn't remember his mom, and I can just imagine how heartbreaking that was, because you're trying so hard to provide for them, and feeling like you're missing your children's childhood, but then still deciding that you wouldn't do it another way because you're giving them more than you could, and that's what you want to do as a mom, is provide and give for your children. If this is what you're choosing to do, is to leave so you can provide. So my I have a quote from that, from this chapter that kind of hit me. It was, that with my actions, I do not see myself as the heroine of the story. I do not justify the mistakes I have made as a mother, but neither could I live waiting for somebody to get me out of my hole. My children are my strength and the foundation that sustain my struggle. And I hope that tomorrow they do not feel that their mother did not try her best. So, like, she couldn't stay there and get herself and her family out of the situation they were. Like, she did her best, and her best was going to be leaving to provide. So the question I have for that is, why do you think women who are in that fiscally, like the breadwinners of the family, these immigrant women are providing financially for their children, why they're still looked down upon? Because they're not fitting in with the emotional or caregiving role to their children. And if you were in that situation, would you migrate to provide for your family? Or would you try to all come or all stay? What do you think you would try to do?